The concept of social alienation refers to an individual's sense of isolation from a group or society with which they identify. This state of estrangement is highlighted by a lack of shared values and increased distance between the individual and or within the collective. This perception has evolved over the ages, encompassing metaphysical, religious, legal, and psychological perspective. Historically, it could suggest a higher spiritual state gained through detachment from worldly restrictions, as embraced by Neoplatonic philosophers of yore. On the flip side, it also meant spiritual disconnection from divinity or the faithful, leading to existential loss. An example of the dichotomy of this concept is found in Gnosticism. Additionally, the idea has been employed in the legal political realm, where alienation of property meant transfer of ownership, dating back to ancient Roman times. In the realm of mental health, ancient Greco-Roman physicians used the term to diagnose altered, difficult, or abnormal mental conditions, speculated to be due to physiological imbalances. In the Middle Ages, social order was linked to alienation, influenced by mysticism and monasticism, with incidents like the Crusades and witch hunts serving as examples of collective estrangement. The Enlightenment saw thinkers like Hugo Grotius and Rousseau explore the concept further. While Grotius proposed that individuals could willingly surrender their innate sovereignty for societal well-being, Rousseau connected alienation with the rise of civil society. Interestingly, the 18th century also saw the introduction of a law enabling men to seek damages from those accused of stealing their female partners, thereby attaching the concept of alienation to interpersonal relationships as well. During the same era, the field of psychology witnessed a paradigm shift when Pinel redefined mental alienation in his medical philosophical treatises. Pinel asserted that mental disturbance could occur due to emotional and social factors. Contradicting the popular belief that it always resulted from a loss of reason, his groundbreaking moral treatment approach earned appreciation from Hegel, who built upon Pinel's theory. Foucault later described that this period led to the birth of two distinct understandings of alienations, one from the perspective of physicians and the other from philosophers. After Hegel, the 19th century witnessed the rise of two factions: left or young Hegelians who modified Hegel's philosophy to advocate political or religious reform, and right or old Hegelians who used his philosophy to support conservatism in politics and religion. Feuerbach, belonging to the former, disagreed with Hegel and affirmed that worshiping God was a form of alienation, as it attributed human traits to an external entity instead of recognizing them within oneself. Influenced by Feuerbach, young Marx started as a young Hegelian who, rejecting the spiritual base, refashioned Hegel's dialectic concept into a theory of historical materialism. Marx's alienation theory, articulated in the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844's and the German Ideology, 1846, primarily emphasized workers being disconnected from their product and production. According to Marx, alienation is a systemic outcome of capitalism, leading to exploitation of men by men where the labor division creates an economic hierarchy. He noticed that under emerging industrial capitalism, workers lost control of their lives and selves due to their lack of control over their work, thus never becoming self-realized human beings. Marx's concept of alienation in various aspects of life was underscored by the dynamics of capitalism and modernity. A worker finds herself alienated in her labor, feeling disconnected from her work when she isn't compelled to do it. Not only workers, but also capitalists, Marx suggests, are alienated, trapped in endless competition, exploitation, and mass societal estrangement for economic gain. Meanwhile, political alienation signifies the alienating nature of politics as they structure the economic productive forces, warping the trajectory of economic development. Meanwhile, human alienation illustrates how individuals, in their survival struggle, become detached from themselves, losing their authentic existence. Marx links this to two facets of human nature: historical conditions, a prerequisite for basics such as food and shelter, and the subsequent development of evolving wants and desires. The pursuit of these endless needs creates a societal vacuum, estranging humans from each other. Concerning ideological alienation, Marx believes religions shift focus from actual to imaginary bliss, further escalating alienation. However, accurately translating these notions of alienation from original German texts is tinged with difficulty. The terms alienations and estrangement often interchangeably represent two unique German words, Entfremdung and Entäußerung, denoting interpersonal alienation and broader externalization or relinquishing, respectively. Emphasizing the ramifications of modernity, late 19th and early 20th century sociologists like George Simmel and Ferdinand Tönnies critically examined the alienating effects of individualization and urbanization. They observed how monetary transactions gradually replaced human relationships and how societal bonds gave way to transactional relationships in the pursuit of objectives. In general, societal structures often prove unresponsive to the unique needs of individual members, culminating in societal alienation. This brand of alienation is pervasive, even if not explicitly acknowledged. Drawing inspiration from 19th century philosopher Søren Kierkegaard's work, it probes the Christian perspective where alienation is considered a detachment from God and how humans respond emotionally when faced with significant life choices. It weaves in the influence these ideas had on 20th century philosophers and theologians, discussing notions of despair, angst, and the importance of individuality. Notable existentialist Martin Heidegger borrowed heavily from Kierkegaard's work, focusing on human anxiety and mortality amid the temporality of existence. Jean-Paul Sartre's theory highlights the inability of the reflective consciousness to comprehend the incomprehensible thing, in itself equating all reflective thinking with inherent angst, a key aspect of the human condition. His views on the self's attempts at understanding the other introduces a masochistic desire for constraint, implying that true hell is the presence of other people. In parallel, the development of psychoanalytic theory, to some extent, mirrors this concept of alienation, emphasizing the dichotomies within human psyche and society, even positing the idea of mechanisms like splitting. In psychological functioning, the theory of repression is compared to the Marxist concept of a false consciousness. Within the spectrum of Western Marxism, it dives into Georgy Lukács' theories on false consciousness, critiques of bureaucracy, and the Protestant ethic drawing from the works of Max Weber. The narrative also delves into the contributions of critical theorists like Theodor Adorno and Erich Fromm, who blended neo-Marxist, neo-Freudian, and sociological theories in their explanations of alienation. Finally, the narrative concludes by connecting socioeconomic structures with psychological states of alienation and personal human relationships, noting the ant-capitalist stance of groups like Situationist International in the 1960s, who pushed for a different way of life, unveiling the spectacle of modern capitalism as a degraded version of human existence. This crucial study opposes ideas that separate issues of alienation from the wider socioeconomic context, or those that take the larger context as it is, frequently attributing the problems to individual abnormalities or inability to adapt. Interest in exploring alienation has seen its ebbs and flows. Post the notable interest in the 1950s and 60s, it declined only to resurface in the 1990s due to events such as the fall of the Soviet Union, globalization, the information explosion, growing sensitivity to ethnic conflicts, and postmodernism. The works of Felix Geyer, Loren Langman, and Devorah Kalekin Fishman have been of particular significance in exploring the theme of alienation in the contemporary Western world. Alienation in terms of a lack of power has been precisely described by Seaman as one's belief that they hold no sway over the results they seek in life. This thought draws from Marx's concept of the worker's condition in a capitalist society. The workers are alienated when the ruling class seizes the power and means of decision-making, Kalekin. Fishman elaborates it as the consciousness of the gap between one's desires and capabilities. Seaman, while discussing powerlessness, takes into consideration psychologist Julian Rotter's distinction between internal and external locus of control, explaining powerlessness as when the individual perceives they can't achieve their goals. In recent times, Geyer points out a new form of powerlessness, where the core issue is not only being non-free, but also finding it hard to choose from a myriad of potential actions. Geyer, applying cybernetics to the theory of alienation, states that powerlessness emerges as a consequence of deferred feedback. He argues that the more complex the environment is, the later we deal with the aftermath of our action. Due to this delayed consequence, both rewards and punishments appear random, often leading to feelings of apathy and alienation. The crux of the narrative centers on the concept of meaninglessness, normlessness, and alienation in our contemporary society. Meaninglessness emerges not from an inability to decipher meaning in the incoming profuse information, but from the exigency to evolve adequate scanning mechanisms for essential information and efficient selection procedures to sieve out irrelevant information, thus managing the ongoing data. Tsunami hints. Geyer asserts that this meaninglessness becomes less pointless and more pertinent. The term normlessness, or anomie, as Durkheim coined, refers to a society functioning without the regulation of social norms, or where existing behavioral rules have lost their efficacy. This state may be due to societal dynamics where dominant values are unrecognizable, or rather perceiving these values wrongly as dominant according to Seaman. It could lead to negative consequences where individuals may believe that socially unacceptable behaviors are necessary to reach their goals. Switching the focus to the root of normlessness, Neil Collis emphasized its birth from complicated and conflicting conditions that render individuals uncertain about the structure and enforcement of social norms. This issue is especially relevant in the aftermath of substantial societal changes, like the collapse of the Soviet Union, mass migrations, and general disillusionment of the 1990s. With traditional values under scrutiny since the 1960s, there was an upsurge of skepticism in the 1990s, prompting individuals to depend more on personal judgment than institutional authority. The concept of alienation can be explored further through the prism of familial relationships, specifically parental alienation. This is seen in cases where a child following parental separation develops a generalized dislike for one parent. However, it only applies when there is no child abuse involved. The disconnection may stem from parental influence, family dynamics, or attachment theories. Familial estrangement between parents and adult children can be traced back to a myriad of factors, including attachment disorders, conflicting beliefs and values, unmet expectations, critical life events, parental alienation, and ineffective communication patterns. Social isolation, described as the felling of disconnection from our community, is emphasized in our modern society, especially as our interactions have become more atomized and impersonal, often with strangers. The mass migrations of people, particularly from Eastern Europe and developing countries into more developed nations after the end of the Cold War, has intensified this feeling of isolation. As displaced communities struggle to find a sense of belonging in new environments, the literature of the diaspora, such as Paravion by Hafid Bouatsa, highlights the sad plight of these migrants. Incidents such as the violent protests that took place across various European cities in 2005, triggered by feelings of alienation among low-income or religiously marginalized communities, illustrate the rising discontent born out of social segregation. One aspect of this social alienation is political alienation, when individuals experience a disconnection from politics, often not aligning with any political party or message, which can lead to apathy, revolution, or attempts at reform. A similar phenomenon is policy alienation, where workers feel disconnected from implemented policy programs. Another critical dimension of alienation is self-estrangement, although defining it can be challenging, as sociologists like Seaman have acknowledged. Conceptually, it is closely tied to social alienation, considered by Marx and others to be the core outcome of social isolation. It can be characterized as a feeling of becoming a stranger to oneself, or a problem with self-knowledge or authenticity. The postmodern perspective, as suggested by Jürgen, asserts that traditional focuses on the self-vs. Society dichotomy is flawed and must be replaced with the concept of a self deeply rooted in relationships. Gergen suggests that feelings of not belonging partially stem from the traditional discourses. This contentious debate raises doubts about the concept of self-estrangement as distinct from social isolation. Thus, modern critiques such as Lacanian readings of self by Costas and Fleming argue for the valuable inclusion of self-estrangement, even if it contradicts the postmodern critique. While alienation and dissociation were previously central to psychiatric understandings of psychological issues, such perceptions changed in the 20th century. In the 1960s, the idea made resurgence, tying into psychoanalytic theories of schizoid states that divided or splits a person from themselves or did. Laying notably focused on societal and familial triggers behind such states of alienation, ultimately asserting that they could be viewed as adaptations rather than disorders. Although many of his theories are no longer widely endorsed, the core ideas of alienation as consequent to socio-political factors persist in certain quarters of the psychology world, such as in critical or liberation psychology. Similarly, psychoanalysts have considered internal conflicts arising from early developmental experiences to be decoupled from larger social-political situations. Theorists like Slavoj Žižek argue that modern-day capitalism fosters self-estrangement by enforcing a relentless command to enjoy, thereby disallowing recognition of alienation and reinforcing it instead. Frantz Fanon highlights mental disorders among colonized populations as the result of objectification and oppressive conditions which limited their autonomy. Amplifying these societal conditions were instances of malignant alienations often found in psychiatric cases deemed difficult or disliked by medical staff, yielding a deterioration of the medical relationship, which could eventuate in patient suicides. Finally, individuals with long-term mental conditions as a result of social alienation routinely faced negative attitudes from their communities and themselves, intensifying the sense of isolation and existential alienation. Despite originating from societal segregation, these attitudes further augment their personal alienation and sense of othernesses. Let's discuss the concept of estrangement and the subsequent creation of alternative societal constructs, an example being the deaf community. Both medical professionals frequently interact with individuals who are either transiently or persistently divorced from society due to resultant or causative medical issues with this. There is a compelling argument that the marked discomfort which such estrangement inflicts deserves more attention. David and Elizabeth Corey, members of the American Political Science Association, have interpreted Eric Voegelin's perspectives as an acceptance of alienation, encapsulating sentiments such as unease, apprehension, and frustration as normative states, adding that efforts to conquer these feelings may ironically beget totalitarianism. Alienation frequently manifests in literature as an individual's psychological disconnection from society or community. Renowned literary works often explore the concept of alienation. For instance, Shakespeare's Hamlet and Bartleby, the Scrivener deploys it in its various facets compellingly. Other notable mentions include The Bell Jar, Brave New World, Notes from Underground, and Mrs. Dalloway. More contemporary works like The Child in Time and Trainspotting also offer a fresh perspective on alienation. Harry Doms, a sociologist, has contextualized the Matrix trilogy within the theories of modern societal alienation, proposing the universal yet often unseen prevalence of alienation in today's world as the film's underlying message. Moreover, the music albums of Pink Floyd and Radiohead, titled The Wall and OK Computer, respectively, lyrically address the subject of estrangement.